Royal Marine Major William Martin was given a mission so risky it bordered on madness. He had to convince Adolf Hitler that the Allies were planning to invade Greece instead of Sicily. If successful, the operation would save countless lives. If it failed, it could doom the entire campaign in the Mediterranean. On April 19, 1943, under the cover of night, Major Martin's body was quietly placed aboard the British submarine HMS Seraph. The submarine sailed alone into enemy-patrolled waters. Twice it came under attack by German bombers, and twice it narrowly escaped. 10 days later, fishermen off the coast of Huelva, Spain, found Martin's body near the shore. He clutched a briefcase containing top-secret invasion plans designed to mislead the Nazis and confuse Hitler himself. These documents had the potential to change the course of history. There was just one problem. Major William Martin had been dead for 3 months. The idea that led to this deception began with a conversation between Naval Intelligence Officer Ewan Montague and his colleague Charles Cholmondeley. They were brainstorming unusual ways to fool the Germans. One day, Cholmondeley suggested something outrageous. Drop a corpse over Nazi-occupied territory. The body would be dressed in a Royal Air Force uniform with a faulty parachute, carrying a wireless set that the Germans would surely take. The hope was that they would try to use the device and unknowingly receive false information from the British. The concept wasn't entirely absurd, and Montague found it more promising than most of Cholmondeley's ideas. Encouraged, Cholmondeley asked if anyone knew how to get a body. Montague thought about it but quickly found flaws in the plan. Airmen didn't carry printed codes on their bodies, so the Germans wouldn't know how to use the wireless. Also, a failed parachute drop would leave obvious signs of trauma, and any decent pathologist would recognize that the body was already dead before hitting the ground. Although intrigued, Montague dismissed the idea as impractical. 2 years later, after the success of Operation Torch and the Allied control of North Africa, Montague, now leading the Intelligence Committee, revisited Cholmondeley's suggestion. It was clear that the Germans expected the Allies to invade southern Europe. But where exactly? Greece, Spain, southern France, or Italy were all possibilities. Strategically, Sicily was the most logical target, which meant it was also where German forces would likely concentrate their defense. That needed to change. The Germans had to be convinced the attack would happen somewhere else. But how could they achieve this without risking many lives? As the team searched for answers, Montague recalled Cholmondeley's long-forgotten plan. He asked why they couldn't take a body, disguise it as a military officer, and equip it with false top-secret documents that pointed to an attack on a different location. The idea was accepted. Cholmondeley's odd suggestion had come back to life, now known as Operation Mincemeat, one of the most daring and unusual deception efforts of the Second World War. Finding a suitable body, however, proved more difficult than expected. In a war where death was widespread, one might assume that obtaining a corpse wouldn't be hard. But the process was complicated, and the first obstacle was moral. Using a human body to deceive the enemy meant violating the dignity of the dead. The team wrestled with this ethical dilemma, but ultimately justified it by focusing on the lives that might be saved through the operation. The task of finding a body proved to be far more difficult than expected. The body needed to appear as if it had come from an aircraft crash at sea, with no signs of illness or foul play. Any inconsistencies could expose the deception. Montague turned to Sir Bernard Spilsbury, a respected forensic pathologist, for advice. Spilsbury reassured him that while a drowning victim would be ideal, it wasn't strictly necessary. Many people involved in sea crashes die from shock, exposure, or blunt trauma, which widened the range of acceptable conditions for the body. Despite this, there were still significant concerns. They couldn't simply ask for a body that met such specific criteria. A body had to be procured discreetly. Then, Montague received a call about a man who had died from pneumonia caused by exposure. The victim, Glyndwr Michael, was an English drifter who had died after ingesting rat poison. His body was in an ideal condition. It showed signs that could easily be mistaken for drowning. He had no close relatives, so Montague was given permission to use the body on the condition that Michael's identity remained a secret. Even though the body didn't fit the profile of a Royal Air Force officer, Montague reassured his team. He explained that the man didn't need to look like an officer, just like a staff officer. Montague returned to Spilsbury, who confirmed that no one in Spain would be able to distinguish the cause of death from drowning. With the path clear, they decided on a name for the operation. Montague chose Operation Mincemeat from a list of available code names, a fittingly grim name for such an audacious plan. The next task was to decide where to deploy the body. Montague selected Huelva, Spain, because of its proximity to a known German agent and high-ranking Spanish military officers. If the body washed ashore near Huelva, it was almost certain that word would reach the Germans. However, if it were discovered too close to Gibraltar, the British base could recognize the body as that of a non-existent officer. Huelva was far enough from Gibraltar to avoid that risk. The body needed to be preserved for the journey, so Montague chose a submarine to transport it. A submarine could get closer to shore undetected, and it was the safest option for preserving the body and documents. After consulting with Spilsbury, Montague decided to use an airtight canister made of steel and filled with dry ice to keep the body preserved. The canister, weighing about 400 pounds, would be launched from the conning tower of the submarine. As luck would have it, the British submarine HMS Seraph, under the command of Lieutenant Norman Jewell, was available for the mission. The crew of HMS Seraph had a history of handling sensitive operations with discretion and creativity, making them ideal for this covert task. Montague explained the details of the operation to Jewell, emphasizing the importance of secrecy. Montague also prepared a fake letter from General Sir Archibald Nye to General Harold Alexander, describing the invasion of Greece and the planned attack on Sicily as a cover. This letter, along with other documents, would be placed with the body to mislead the Germans. The deception had to be flawless, or the consequences could be catastrophic. With time running out, the urgency of ensuring the body was ready for its intended role became apparent. Initially, the plan was for the body to belong to an officer of the British Army. However, Montague soon realized that the vast communications network of the Army posed a risk. There was no way to control what might be revealed if the deception was compromised, and a single slip could unravel the entire scheme. The body was dressed in a Royal Marines uniform to reduce this risk, as the Royal Navy's more secure communications network offered a safer alternative. This, however, created a new challenge. Royal Marines carried photo IDs. Despite efforts to make the body appear lifelike, nothing seemed to work. As time dwindled and no alternatives were left, Montague began searching for someone who resembled their decoy. He found a match in Captain Ronnie Reed of MY5, who agreed to have his photograph taken while wearing the Royal Marines uniform. To make the documents appear aged, they were officially issued as replacements for lost originals. Montague then spent the following weeks rubbing the 3 cards on his trousers to give them a weathered look. To enhance the illusion further, Montague and Cholmondeley added personal details, referred to as wallet litter, in espionage circles. This included a photo of a fictional fiancée named Pam, who was actually MI5 clerk John Leslie. They also included 2 love letters from Pam, and a receipt for a diamond engagement ring bought from a Bond Street jeweler. Further personal correspondence was fabricated, including a letter from Martin's fictional father, who was described as pompous and pedantic as only an Edwardian father could be. Montague even worked with MI5's scientists to test various ink brands, ensuring the ink would remain legible after immersion in seawater. After extensive testing, they selected inks that would survive the exposure. In the early hours of April 17, 1943, Glyndwr Michael's body was completely transformed into Major William Martin. The uniform and personal items were in place, and the body was sealed into a canister. The canister was packed with 21 pounds of dry ice, which would sublimate into carbon dioxide, flushing out the oxygen and preserving the body without refrigeration. The canister was then loaded into a 1937 Fordson van, driven by MI5 agent St. John Jock Horsfall, a former racing champion. Montague and Cholmondeley traveled in the back of the van, guarding the canister as they sped toward Greenock on the west coast of Scotland, where HMS Seraph awaited. As they passed a movie theater, Montague glanced out the window to see a crowd gathering for a spy film. Cholmondeley laughed, knowing a far more thrilling espionage story was unfolding just a few meters away, with no one having any idea. The canister was brought aboard the HMS Seraph, and Commander Lieutenant Bill Jewell briefed his crew, telling them the canister contained a top-secret meteorological device bound for deployment off the coast of Spain. Not even his crew knew the truth. On April 19, 1943, Seraph set sail, and the journey to the southern coast of Spain was fraught with danger, as the vessel was bombed twice along the way. Nonetheless, Seraph pressed on and arrived near Huelva on April 29th. After observing the coastline for a day, the operation entered its final phase. At 4:15 a.m. on April the 30th, the submarine surfaced under cover of darkness. Jewell ordered the canister to be brought to the deck. He dismissed all but his officers, opened the container, and gently lowered the body into the water. The body of Major Martin drifted just off the Spanish coast, carried by the push of Seraph's engines. Jewell recited Psalm 39 as a final farewell for a man who had never truly lived. The canister was taken 12 miles back out to sea, riddled with machine gun fire, and then destroyed with plastic explosives after failing to sink due to trapped air in its insulation. Jewell sent the final message to British High Command. Mincemeat completed. Around 9:30 a.m. that same day, a local fisherman discovered the body. Spanish soldiers retrieved it and delivered it to the naval authorities in Huelva. British Vice Consul Francis Hazelden, who had been briefed in advance, was notified by the Spanish and quickly reported the discovery to the Admiralty in London. A series of carefully planned diplomatic messages followed, emphasizing that the documents inside the briefcase were of utmost importance. These messages were designed to be intercepted, knowing that the Germans had broken the British code. The goal was to create the illusion that the documents were vital. On May 1st, an autopsy was conducted. Hazelden attended the procedure to ensure its success, ensuring it ended quickly when the unbearable stench of the 3-month-old corpse in the Spanish heat became too much. He suggested the doctors break for lunch, and they agreed. The death certificate, issued without a thorough examination, stated the cause of death as asphyxiation through immersion in the sea. Sir Bernard Spilsbury's assessment had been correct. 2 days later, Major Martin was buried with full military honors in the San Marcos section of Huelva's Nuestra Señora Cemetery. Although the Spanish Navy retained the briefcase, they initially withheld its contents from German intelligence. Persistent pressure from Abwehr agent Adolf Klaus and others eventually led to its release. On May 5th, the briefcase was transferred to naval headquarters in San Fernando, where sympathetic Spanish personnel photographed its contents, though they did not open the letters. It was only when the case reached Madrid that the documents became the focus of the German operation. Karl Erich Kuhlenthal, one of the Abwehr's senior agents in Spain, urged Admiral Wilhelm Canaris to pressure the Spanish government to surrender the documents. Spanish officials carefully opened the letters using a delicate method. The damp paper was carefully wound into a cylinder and extracted from the envelope without breaking the wax seal. The pages were dried, photographed, soaked in salt water for 24 hours, and then returned to their envelopes. The false intelligence, suggesting an Allied invasion of Greece and Sardinia, was passed on to the Germans by May 8th. Kuhlenthal personally carried the photographs to Berlin. On May 11th, the briefcase and its contents were formally returned to Hazelden and sent back to London. British forensic analysts noted the absence of the eyelash they had planted in one of the envelopes to detect tampering. Further analysis showed that the paper had been folded multiple times, and there was clear evidence that the documents had been removed, read, and replaced. As a final confirmation, the letters dried into the same curled shape they had taken when extracted by Spanish intelligence. To maintain the ruse, British command sent another staged encrypted cable to Hazelden, which was easily crackable, stating that the documents had not been opened. Hazelden then leaked this information to known Spanish contacts sympathetic to the Germans. The deception had worked. On May 14th, Ultra, Britain's top-secret signals intelligence operation at Bletchley Park, intercepted a German transmission confirming that the mincemeat material had been believed. The Germans believed the Allies were preparing for an invasion of Greece, with a diversionary strike against the Dodecanese Islands. A message from Brigadier Leslie Hollis to Winston Churchill, then in the U.S., confirmed. Mincemeat swallowed rod, line, and sinker by the right people, and from the best information they look like acting on it. Montague reinforced Major Martin's identity by placing his name in the Times obituary column on June 4th, alongside other officers lost at sea. By coincidence, the same day's paper also included the obituary of film star Leslie Howard, whose plane had been shot down by the Luftwaffe over the Bay of Biscay. The proximity of these notices helped cement the credibility of Martin's obituary. The consequences were swift and decisive. On May 14th, German Admiral Karl Dönitz met with Hitler and relayed the forged information. Hitler was convinced and ordered massive reinforcements to Sardinia and Greece, believing them to be the true targets of the Allied invasion. The experienced 1st Panzer Division was relocated from France to Salonika. Aircraft were sent to the Greek islands, German divisions were shifted to the Balkans, and torpedo boats were moved away from Sicily. When the Allies invaded Sicily on July 9th under Operation Husky, Hitler remained fixated on the Balkans. German aircraft even left Sicily hours into the invasion to reinforce Sardinia. Rommel himself was dispatched to prepare for a major confrontation in Greece. By the time the German High Command realized Sicily was the real target, it was too late. Sicily fell on August 17, 1943, after a 38-day campaign. British planners had anticipated 90 days of fighting and heavy casualties. Instead, the losses were much lighter, with fewer than 1/7 of the expected Allied casualties and only 12 ships lost instead of 300. Historian John Latimer later noted that mincemeat was not the sole reason for the success of the campaign, but its influence was undeniable. Michael Howard described it as perhaps the most successful single deception operation of the entire war. Decades later, a British journalist uncovered Major Martin's real identity as Glyndwr Michael. To honor his legacy, his grave in Huelva, Spain, where he had been buried with full military honors as Major Martin, was updated to reflect both identities. The epitaph now reads, Glyndwr Michael, who served as Major William Martin, R.M.